خلي somebody get us some water later.
You got me. Cool.
Assalamu alaikum.
Use this mic. Use these two mics.
And as we mentioned at the last session, inshallah, this session we will start with a series of sessions. There will be this 3 parts, inshallah. This is the first part with Dr. Jeffrey Lang. He's a professor at University of Kansas at Lawrence. He's a professor in mathematics, and he is the MSA advisor at the university. Brother Khan, inshallah, will moderate this session, and we welcome Dr. Jeffrey Lang, and inshallah, Brother Khan is good.
Can I start? Like it.
الحمد لله وصلي وسلم على رسول الله وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Dear brothers and sisters, it's a privilege and honor for me to introduce this lecture, which is a part of 3 lectures. Dr. Jeffrey Lang, as Dr. Hussein mentioned, is a professor at the University of Kansas. He teaches math, but his second interest after mathematics, I understand, is reading, and alhamdulillah, reading on Islam and Islamic material. He covered a lot of reading. He had good homework that he finished. Does this homework every day, I understand. Comes walking to my office, which is about 45 minutes walking. And I ask him to give him a ride. He always says no. He want to walk. He finished a book titled Struggling to Surrender, and it will be on the market shortly, inshallah. And the second book is on its way. And the lectures that we have today and tomorrow, inshallah, are parts of his second book, which is titled, he wrote other books, of course, in math, but in Islamic material, this is his second book, which is titled The Way to Islam in America. We will deal with it in 3 parts. The first part deals with the questions. By the questions, we mean the questions that come to the mind of all the Muslims who come over here, the questions who stop people from being religious, from coming to commit themselves to Islam. What are these questions? How they come to their minds? And then towards the end of the first part 1 of today, he is going to discuss briefly the introduction to Islamic response to these. And tomorrow, inshallah, he's going to talk about the second part, how the Quran answers these questions, and how the Quran deals nicely in giving the answer to those questions that come to their mind, especially his mind when he was an atheist and he converted to Islam, and how Islam or the Quran did the reaction and interaction that made him make the decision, which will bring us to part 3, which is the decision. The process of making the decision, how it's being made, how this birth of a new Muslim is being made, the difficulties that he or she may face, and how he or she would be able to overcome these difficulties. This is part 3. So in today's part, expect that you will see a lot of things that may confuse you. Expect to be talking about questions, problems. So please, I ask you from the beginning to be patient. When he gave this lecture in Lawrence, a lot of the brothers showed some unhappiness with that. Of course, they didn't hear the rest of the lecture, which is happening also today, because the rest will come tomorrow. So please be patient until you hear all the parts together. And if you have any questions, I'll interfere, because I know how to interfere. So I ask your apology if I ask your forgiveness if my interference sometimes may seem not in place. I kindly ask Dr. Jeffrey to make his presentation.
How long does she? Assalamu alaikum. May God's peace be upon you. Can you all hear me all right? I'm a little nervous. One correction, though. It's a technical point. The title of my second book is, I'm planning on making it Even the Angels Asked. It's about reflections on Islam and the purpose of life. One of the great novels written in this century is the novel by William Somerset Maugham, entitled Of Human Bondage. It's a very powerful novel, and when I read it, just reread it a couple of weeks ago, it reminds me so much of my own life, my 20s and early 30s. And in that novel, there is a scene where the main character, Philip, asks an artist friend of his, what is the meaning and purpose of life? And his friend tells him, you see that Persian rug over there? Points to an Oriental rug. He says, if you study that rug long enough, study the intricate patterns and design, you'll come to know the answer to that question. So Philip says, no, just tell me the answer, and I'll go back and study the rug. He says, no, you have to find that answer yourself. It's no good unless you find it yourself. Well, Philip's life over the years gets more and more tragic, one more crisis after another, until finally he hits rock bottom. He's destitute, poor, and his life is filled with tragedy. And then one day as he's walking along, he pictures the Persian rug in his mind, and he's contemplating it as he walks along, and then he suddenly realizes that his friend was right. It dawns on him that his friend was correct. The answer to what is the meaning and purpose of life is contained in the Persian rug. Because he comes to realize, this is his realization, comes to see that life, like the many patterns in the Persian rug, is intricate, is complex, is often beautiful, but in the end, it's utterly and totally meaningless. This is what he arrives at. This was indeed a very Western novel, and a very Western point of view, a European point of view, so to speak. This idea about what is the meaning and purpose of life, why are we here, why didn't God just put us into heaven in the first place, how could a just God put us in such a suffering environment when we haven't even done anything yet as individuals, how he could do this, these questions have dominated Western thought for over 2,000 years. If you go to a university library on almost any campus in this country, and you pick up at random a book on philosophy, or theology, or logic, or psychology, if you pick up most novels that have character studies, you'll see this question asked in one form or another again and again and again. It's probably the most significant and important question that Western man has ever faced, European man. And it has informed his culture, his politics, his society, the way he looks at life, the way he looks at all religions, the way he looks at pluralism, the way he looks at religion and politics, and on and on and on. It's perhaps the most important, vital question in European civilization, and I would include America in that. A famous professor of psychology and religion by the name of C.G. Jung wrote that he finds that in his patients that this is the biggest crisis they seem to face in one form or another. The vast majority of them are facing a crisis of meaning. Their life has no meaning. And they cannot reconcile that with their religion. In other words, they see a conflict between what their mind tells them rationally and what their religion tells them, whatever that religion might be, religiously or dogmatically. And they can't resolve the conflict, and he says it creates a tremendous, deep tension, a tremendous fission in the person's personality. And many psychologists and psychiatrists have echoed that, and sociologists as well. Viktor Frankl, famous psychiatrist who was at Auschwitz, he also mentioned the very same thing. That the biggest crisis facing human beings today is a crisis of meaning. He said, especially in America, because there's no traditions in America, or very little. And so people have nothing to take root in. And so they feel lost and empty, and they can't find reason in their existence. Another writer I came across just the other day, he said, no religion that is in America or comes to America could hope to gain true influence over Western society again, European society as well, unless it could reconcile faith and reason, unless it could not only be compelling from a spiritual level, but could be compelling from a rational level too. Well, in any case, in the last 20 or 30 years or so, we have the Muslim enters the scene. Largely through immigration, the last 30 years have seen a tremendous influx of Muslims coming to the United States and Europe. Also, there's been a considerable conversion among black Americans to Islam. And there's been a trickle among the white Americans as well, those of European heritage. The Muslim enters the scene and enters this dialogue. Here's a typical scenario. The Muslim walks up to an American, it says, and he feels he wants to make a contribution. And he says, you know, when I consider religions in America, I just don't see where they make any sense. And then the American, especially if he's a university trained or so, or well-read, he's likely to say, frankly, I don't think any religion makes sense. It startles the Muslim because he expects him to defend religion or defend his own belief. The American feels no need to. He feels that all religions are essentially senseless in some sense, somewhat irrational. The Muslim says, no, my religion makes sense. The American comes back and he says, well, could I ask you a few questions? The Muslim says, sure. He says, well, tell me, what is the meaning and purpose of life? Why are we here? Why didn't God just pop us into heaven in the first place? Why would a perfect God create an imperfect world? If he could create heaven, which is perfection, why would he also create something imperfect? If he could create angels, which are perfect, why does he create humans, which are imperfect? If he loves us, why does he expose us to terrible torment and suffering? Oftentimes inexplicably. The Muslim thinks, tries to draw back on his memory, all the things he was taught since a child, all those things that were universally accepted in his culture. Suddenly, explanations that he was given and everyone understood and everyone agreed upon come immediately to his mind. And the first thing he says is, God created us and put us on this earth to test us. And so the American asks, oh, so you believe that God is sort of imperfect in his knowledge. He doesn't have full knowledge of all things. The Muslim says, no, he knows everything. And then he says, well, what's he going to learn by testing us? Why does he need to test us? Suddenly he feels, that explanation didn't work. Let me try something else. And he reaches back into his memory again, and he comes up, no, he put us here because he wants us to worship him. And the American says, oh, so you feel that God has certain character flaws, certain weaknesses, certain needs, psychological needs. And the Muslim says, no, not at all. I don't think that. God has no needs. He says, well, if God has no needs, what does he need your worship for? If I, as a human, demanded your worship, you'd say I have some sort of pathological problem, a character flaw, a terrible weakness, tyrants that demand our worship. So what's going on? The Muslim goes back to his mind again. Now his head is swimming. He's looking, darting through his mind, trying to think of the explanation. He'll do the trick. He finally says, no, I know. Adam sinned. He was sent to earth, and we've descended from him. He was sent to earth as a punishment. And the Muslim says, the American says, then you believe God is unjust. And he said, no, God is perfectly just. Well, he said, why do you... Well, okay, I could understand punishing Adam, sending him to the earth, but why punish all his descendants as well? Give them a chance. If they sin, send them to earth. If they don't, leave them in heaven. Why punish all of them when they haven't even done anything yet? Do you guys believe in original sin? No, we don't. Well, then what's going on here? Suddenly he comes away confused. He or she doesn't know exactly what will work, what explanation to give. Will this mean that he or she will suddenly leave the faith? Chances are no. I think the vast majority of Muslims, and many Muslims do, confront this conversation sooner or later. No, they're not going to leave their faith. Why not? Well, the reason is that the majority of Muslims right now living in America came from Muslim environments where the vast majority of people were Muslims. And in that environment provided them with the atmosphere where they could grow and practice and believe in this religion and follow it and practice it and work at it. And slowly but surely they found as they got older that indeed they started to have a tremendous, beautiful, powerful experience of peace, of transcendence, of God's nearness. Maybe they experienced miracles. Maybe they had awe-inspiring experiences, utterly beautiful experiences. They had time for that faith to root and grow. To now, all these sort of rational arguments really don't matter because the experience of faith they had is so great, so powerful, so real, that it's as real as anything else. And it's proof for them of its truth. And so, no, these rational arguments, they just may be unprepared, but they're not likely to leave the religion. That doesn't mean some won't. There are a considerable number of Salman Rushdis. Salman Rushdie says in his autobiography that he came to England a very religious young man. But when he encountered rational thought, when he encountered Western critical thought, and it was applied to religion, he came to doubt his religious roots, and he came to disbelieve in the religion. And indeed, at my own university where I'm teaching, and I don't say this as a criticism or a judgment, but there are several Muslim professors or professors with Muslim names on the campus right now. And I'd have to say that those that I know personally have completely disavowed any connection to Islam. They'll just say, I'm not a Muslim. I was a Muslim, but I'm not a Muslim now. And I've heard that the others, the two or three that I don't know personally, either distance themselves from the religion, say, well, I'm not really religious. Or just say, oh, all religions are the same. But none of them participate in the Muslim community at all. And I found this on college campus after college campus after college campus. So there are some that might be affected by this encounter. What about the convert? I was reading a study by a member of ISNA the other day, a former member, who said that at one stage ISNA was very concerned by the high rate of apostasy among converts. I thought, is there a high rate of apostasy among converts? And then I thought, yes, most of my friends that became Muslims in America left. I mean, it's a fact. It's a bitter fact, but it's true. How many survived? Especially among the so-called, those that have European heritage. How many survived? From my own experience, told me that for every one that survives, several don't. Why? Well, the convert situation is very different than that of the person who grows in a Muslim culture where religion is universally accepted. From the day one he converts, he's in an environment where the religion is not accepted, where it's criticized, where it's picked apart, where it's rationalized, where it's attacked, where he tries to practice that religion, he finds barrier after barrier after barrier. For many of them, they never even get, whatever their initial experience is, they find that it's very difficult to get that faith to root, to grow, to get it into the soil. And so many of them, their faith quickly gets uprooted. Whatever that initial experience was, it was not enough to help them hold on to their faith. Is Islam going to survive in America? I mean, is it truly going to survive here? Well, that question isn't about immigrants, and that question is not about converts. That's a question about children. See, I mean, it's one thing to talk about what's going to happen to the immigrant, what's going to happen to the convert, but the far more important issue for the future of Islam in America is what's going to happen to the children. Because their experience is not like the converts, and their experience is not like the immigrants. It's completely different. And will their faith survive? Well, it's hard to say. Because on the one hand, we see the immigrant, his faith is strong because of his experience of the faith. For the convert, some of them have very strong faith, but some of them commit apostasy because their experience, whatever it was inadequate. Well, what about the children? Well, regardless of how good a father I am, I cannot pass my experience on to my child. Experience is something individual and personal. I can't take my experience and make that child experience exactly the same thing. I could tell him about it or her about it. I could explain it to them, but no matter how good I am at explaining it, they will never relive it. Not like I did. See, the problem is that if faith comes down to experience, then faith comes down to something personal and individual. I could give you a proof or give you a logical argument. And regardless of where you're from, if you understand everything I said, you could appreciate it on the same level that I did. Because it's rational, something universal. But an experience is not. I can't tell you about my experience and you just grasp it fully. And this is the big problem. We expect our children to pick up this religion by virtue of our experience. We expect them to just sort of get it by osmosis or inheritance. When faith comes down to experience, when it becomes individual, when it becomes personal, then Islam or any religion, they all become the same. The Christians will tell you that if you want to believe in Christianity, you have to experience it. The Buddhists, the Hindus, the Krishnas, the Muslims, they all, if it all comes down to experience, then for all practical purposes, all religions in America are essentially the same. They're a matter of experience. If you can't make a rational case for your religion, if, as C.G. Jung said, if you can't make that religion compelling on the spiritual and the rational level, then religion becomes essentially spiritual, personal, individual, and a matter of personal choice. A leap of faith. And once it becomes that, all religions are essentially the same. And once that happens, and you're an American child, and you see all religions as essentially the same. My own daughter came to me with that type of question. She said to me, and a brother just told me that his daughter came to him with the very same question today. Daddy, how do we know that our religion is true over the others? Don't other people think their religions are true? She's only 7 years old. But already she has adopted a Western approach towards religion. Her approach to religion is very rational. My 6-year-old daughter, Sarah, said to me, Daddy, why didn't God just put it in heaven to start with? See, when they watch Nickelodeon, or they watch TV, or they're taught in school, these questions are so interwoven. This approach is so interwoven in the culture, they adopt it. Why? Because they're American. They think like Americans. They see the world as Americans. They approach religion as Americans. They say it takes 2 generations before an immigrant family becomes completely assimilated in American culture. 2 generations. I was reading a very disturbing statistic several years ago. And it was by one of the Islamic magazines in America. It said 90% of children born to Muslim parents, but who were born in America, who have reached the age of 20 or above, either do not believe in God at all, or see all religions as essentially the same. 90%. I was astounded. 90%? If you polled Catholics, you might find that number 30%. You know, if you polled Jews, maybe 60. But 90? 90, that seemed like an astronomical figure. Can it be that high? I wanted to know exactly how the study was done. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to see how scientific it was. But I never got to find out. But I heard the same thing quoted at the last ISNA meeting. Virtually the same statistic. Now, I don't know if this is just an emotional response or this is a scientific study, but indeed, it does show that there's a certain alarm. There's a certain perception that many children born to Muslim parents in America are, by the age of 20, by the time they get to college, by the time they are open to all sorts of new questions, all sorts of critical methods, all sorts of methods of doubt, all sorts of self-critical methods, they're coming to doubt the truth of their religion. If religion is a matter of experience, if it becomes something personal, if it becomes something of choice, how many Muslim children do you think, if Islam just becomes for them another option, will hold on to this religion? Think about it. Of all the religions in America, it's the hardest one to practice here. It's the most demanding. Many of its practices go against the cultural flow of this society. If you add to that the majority of people here are not Muslims, don't really appreciate Islam, and of all the religions in this country, Islam is by far the most despised, are we so surprised at statistics like 90%? Are we so surprised? Why should our children be any different than a Hindu, Buddhist, Krishna, Taoist children who have come to America and have left their religion and probably adopted no religion whatsoever? Just sort of an agnostic point of view. Why should we be so surprised? Do our children have different genes? Why should we be so surprised? Unless we could relate our religion to those children in a way that is compelling, rationally, that is relevant to their way of thinking, and that is spiritually powerful. If we could do that, then there's hope. If we can't do that, then it really doesn't matter. I don't think there's going to be much hope. We could talk about all the other issues that concern us, men and women's roles in Islam, science and the Quran, etc., Islam and politics, interest system, and etc. All that'll mean nothing if we don't come to terms, with our children, if we can't relate our religion to them in a way that they could understand. Because this is the great failure of all religions in the Western Hemisphere. 1,000 years ago, when Christianity was preached to the masses in Europe, those masses were 99% illiterate. And what was preached to them made sense to them. It worked. But those same descendants of those same people, 1,000 years later, those same explanations no longer work. And religion has been put on the shelf for most Americans. Back on the shelf. Even most people that go to church at the University of Kansas, the professors that do, have grave doubts about whether their religion is true or not. But they feel it's a good moral system the children will learn. When did I start thinking about this problem? I started thinking about this problem 8 years ago. I had been a Muslim for 3 years. And something very dramatic happened. Pardon? Yeah, I had been a Muslim for 3 years at that time. I'm a Muslim for 11 years now. And something very dramatic happened. We were sitting in the masjid one night after the Isha prayer, like we always do. Myself and about 15 other guys. And the leader of our masjid, the elder, the communities were still very young in those days. The elder was about 38 years old. He was about 40. But the eldest member of our community, Muhammad, he was from Algeria, turned to us after the prayer, and we sat in a circle and we were talking. And then suddenly somebody asked him, "Muhammad, how old is your boy?" He knew we were referring to his oldest son. He had the oldest child in our tiny community. San Francisco has maybe 15,000, 20,000 Muslims in the Bay Area, but we had a little masjid, and Muhammad had the oldest child, and we were very proud of his child because he was farthest along. The rest of us were just starting families. And he said, he became 16 today. So he said, yeah, Muhammad, congratulations. We were all celebrating and twinkling in their eyes and patting him on the back. And then all of a sudden the masjid fell completely silent. And as we looked at Muhammad's face, huge round teardrops were forming in his eyes. And they were slowly, agonizingly dripping down his cheeks. And we were dead silent. And then he looked at us and said, brothers, I lost him. I've lost my son. We didn't say anything. We just stayed dead silent. This man was the pillar of our community. It was a terrible defeat. We didn't know what to say. We have seen it happen 1,000 times before in all the other communities in San Francisco. We had walking cases of this before our eyes all the time. If a Muslim reached teenage years in San Francisco, born in America, and he was still in some way practicing Islam, it was a miracle in San Francisco. We shouldn't have expected any different, but somehow it crushed us. And driving back at home that night in my car, I couldn't help but think of what Muhammad said. It kept coming back to me again and again and again, because I was just newly married for about a year, and my wife had just become pregnant. And I thought that someday I'm going to have a child, and I wonder if I'm going to repeat the same words 16, 17 years later. And then when I thought about it, I thought, I don't agree with Muhammad. As much as I loved him, I still do, I wasn't convinced that Muhammad had ever lost his son. And the reason is because I don't think he ever really found him in the first place. You see, Muhammad was the perfect Algerian Muslim father. He did everything a good Algerian Muslim father should do to bring up a good Algerian Muslim son. But the big problem was, his son wasn't Algerian. His son, even though it's only the first generation, was as American as apple pie. He thought like American, he looked like an American, he talked like an American, and whatever explanations, whatever worked back in Algeria, wasn't working here. Whatever explanations did the trick back in Algeria, they weren't doing the trick here. He couldn't relate that religion to his son in a way that his son could relate to. That's when I began thinking about this issue. So in any case, I want to share with you today and then in the next two lectures some reflections on this problem. And the main problem facing Western society, what is the meaning and purpose of life? And to do that, I am going to sort of combine conversations, thoughts, communications that I've had with other American Muslims who came to the religion through the same door I have, through the door of atheism or agnosticism. Because this is all I have to offer, and all we have to offer is our experience. But hopefully, in relating this experience to you, you'll come to understand at least what we felt was compelling about Islam on the rational level. And I'm hoping that it'll help us formulate answers to the questions that our children are going to face day in, day out as they grow up in America. So in other words, I'm asking you to take a journey with me. A journey to Islam in America. Now, of course, when you're going to take a journey, you have two questions on your mind. One is, what do I need to bring along? What baggage should I assume? And the answer to that is, I want you to bring nothing. I want you to bring absolutely nothing. I want you to pretend for a moment that you have no commitment to any religion, just hypothetically, of course. I want you to erase the idea from your mind that you believe in God. I want you not to be a belligerent atheist, but an atheist who just can't make sense out of any of the religions before it, and so doesn't accept it. I want your mind, your commitment to religion, to be blank. The second thing is, what's going to be our guide? And our guide, and I'm sure you know what that'll have to be, it'll have to be the Quran, the source of faith for a billion Muslims worldwide. Because if we start to approach these questions and formulate an answer, no matter how coherent it is, if it's not based on the very source of Islam, then it's just another human construct, and it could be taken or ignored like anything else. A human theory based wholly on human thought, no matter how consistent, it's not going to be very compelling. And especially it's not going to guide us to these questions in terms of Islam. So that's it. Your baggage, I want you to be blank when it comes to religion. Your guidebook, the Quran. And with me, my fellow hypothetical atheists, let's open up the Quran and let's try to approach the problems that have dominated American and European society for over 2,000 years. So we open the Quran. I don't have much time. I'll just be able to start this today. So we open the Quran, and we turn to the very first surah. We're not expecting much, but we turn to it, and we read the first one. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, all praise goes back to God, etc., etc., etc. And we read the first surah. 7 short verses. We come quickly to realize that this is a prayer, that we're being taught a prayer. By repeating it ourselves, we are in a sense making a supplication. What are we asking for? You all know, is guidance. Show us the straight path. Don't let us go astray. Don't let us suffer. Show us the straight path. It's essentially a prayer for guidance. We turn to the second surah of the Quran. We come to the first verse. Alif Lam Mim Dalika Kitab. That is the book. Suddenly the entire perspective of the Quran has changed. The tenor of the Quran has changed. In the first surah, it was apparently us making a supplication. Now the tenor is, the point of view is, God addressing the reader, the audience. It's shifted. And it'll maintain that address through the rest of the Quran. That is the book. What is the book? That is the book wherein, no doubt, is guidance. It's telling us that the prayer that we have just made has an answer. That is the book wherein, no doubt, is guidance. For who? For those who are God conscious, who believe in a reality beyond their perceptions, and so on and so on and so on. It's telling us that this is a guidance, and now in the next several verses, many verses, it'll describe its audience. You know, when I write a math book, after I introduce the topics, I say, and this book is appropriate for people that have reached this level, and if you haven't reached this level, then you have to study this and this and this. I describe the audience. Who will benefit from my book? Who will benefit a little bit? Who will not benefit at all? And we notice the Quran does this in the first many passages of the second surah. It too describes the audience in the different levels or types that will approach this Quran, that will hear it, and even to some extent how they will react. Once we do that, we get past that, we come to the 30th verse in the Quran. And right away, of course, it gets to the main issue. The origin of mankind. So let's take it one verse at a time. All of us collectively, my audience of hypothetical atheists. Let's take it one verse at a time and see what we could read in it. But remember, you have to read it carefully. Because the Quran, you can't just skip over things very quickly, because you're likely to assume things that might, on second thought, necessarily be true. The great Arab scholars of the Quran used to say that the Quran has this quality of ijaz. In a single verse, it is so concise, so economical, and powerful in expression, it's very easy to miss essential points. So the only thing is, let's go through it carefully and slowly. So we turn to the 30th verse of the second surah, and it begins. Behold, your Lord said to the angels, I will create a Khalifa, a vicegerent on earth. Notice that Adam hasn't even appeared on the scene yet. No mention is made of him, what he has done, what state he is in at this moment. The only thing we know, and he certainly hasn't committed any wrong deed yet, the only thing we know is that your Lord said to the angels, I am about to create a vicegerent on earth. This is very strange. From our old religious tradition, we remember that Adam going to earth was because of a wrongdoing. Now, he hasn't committed any wrongdoing yet, and yet God is revealing that he's going to put this man and mankind on earth. It's a wonder to us. Slightly strange. Something doesn't seem quite familiar. And they said, the angel said, will you put therein one who will make mischief and shed blood, while we celebrate your praises and glorify your holy name? Now notice their question. This question sounds utterly familiar. Will you put therein one who will spread mischief and shed much blood? It's a very strange question. That question, I recognize it somewhere. We all do. That is our question. It's the atheist's question, confronting us in the very first verse in the Quran that deals with the nature and the creation of man. This is our question. Why would you possibly create this being who spreads mischief, sheds blood, suffers, dies, agony, terrible things, murder, death, destruction? Why would you even do this, create this environment, this creature? It's our question. The question that has driven us from religion. The first verse that deals with it in the Quran, and there it is before our eyes. But it's not us who's using it to combat religion. It's the Quran using it to combat us. Will you put therein one who will make mischief and shed blood? And notice who's asking the question. Where's that question coming from? It's coming from heaven. It's talking about earth, and it's coming from heaven. Implicit in the question is, why are you creating this creature for this earthly environment with all this suffering, when you could create this perfect heaven, paradise? More important still, who is the question coming from? The angels. The angels of all beings. If we were to ask it, it would certainly be legitimate. But when the angels ask it, what do you think of when you think of angels? When we use the word angel in our society, in our language, what do we mean? If you look at the newspapers, what is Mother Teresa always referred to? She's an angel of mercy, an angel of kindness. We think of angels as being the best that humankind could be, something that they can never reach but that they should aspire to. When someone does something very kind, very good, we say to them, oh, he's such an angel, or she's such an angel. Even in the New Testament, it says that God created Jesus a little lower than the angels. In his humanity, he was a little lower than the angels. Because the angel we think of as better than us. When I watch my children sleep at night, my 3 daughters, and I go over and look at them with my wife, and they sleep there in such solitude and peace and tranquility, what do we say? We all say it. We're parents. Aren't they angels? When we think of angels, we think of peace and joy and happiness and goodness, greatness, mercy, compassion, things that we could only poorly approximate in ourselves. And so it's so significant that this question comes from the angelic hosts. Because when the angels ask it, implicit in the question is, why are you creating this being, this patently inferior being, to live in this imperfect world when you could create a being like us? And they say it explicitly in paradise when they say, while we celebrate your praises and glorify your holy name. Why are you creating this when you could create creatures like us? And then he said, Quran says that God said, I know what you do not know. Many an Orientalist has studied that passage, deliberated on it, much like I just have, and came to the conclusion that, and in that last statement, I know what you do not know, the Quran simply dismisses the question, doesn't really deal with it. And they point out that no religion ever has. But is that true? We've learned as atheists that everybody has a religious side to them, even the Orientalists. They have their own religious or irreligious commitments. And we've become very skeptical. We don't trust Orientalists, and we don't trust religious writers. So we go on. We just check this out. So we go on to verse number 31. Does the Quran just drop the issue? No. In the next passages, it continues the narrative, directly referring back to this question. It says, and he, God, taught Adam the names of all things. Short statement. He taught Adam the names of all things. Notice, in this verse, very clearly, we see that Adam is a learning creature. He can be taught. What's he being taught? How to name things. What things? All things. Not just material things, but his desires, his hopes, his dreams, his insights. He's taught verbal communication, how to communicate his thoughts, his ideas, his anxieties, his knowledge, his fears, his insights, his wisdom in verbal symbols. This is a great power, of course, because it gives all knowledge, all human knowledge, a cumulative sense, power. None of us are islands. What I know is not just what I know. What I know is a product of thousands of years of handing down from one generation to the next the cumulative knowledge of past generations. This is a great power that man has. And the Quran singles it out here. And he taught Adam the names of all things. And then he placed them before the angels and said, notice it's talking about the same question now. And it's interesting that the Quran singles this out, man's ability to learn and his ability to communicate on a highly verbal level. And it refers back to the angels' question immediately. And then he placed them before the angels and said, tell me their names, if you are right. And now we find in the next verse that the angels are inferior in this regard. Notice it says, tell me their names if you are right. It's pointing back to the question. We're getting a clue, partial clue, maybe a small clue, but a clue to the answer to the question. They said, glory to you. We have no what? No knowledge. We have no knowledge except what you taught us. They're limited in their knowledge. In truth, it is you who are perfect in knowledge and wisdom. They're saying to do this type of thing takes knowledge and wisdom. You are God. You have the knowledge and wisdom. You have infinite knowledge and wisdom. But we, angels, we have just very limited knowledge and wisdom. This takes knowledge and wisdom, a certain level that we do not possess. And then in the next verse it says, and he said, O Adam, tell them their names. Next verse we find Adam can do it. He's superior in this respect. And it's partial answer to the angel's question. When he had told them their names, God said, and now it goes back to that question, just so that you make no mistake about it. Did I not tell you that I know the secrets of the heavens and the earth, and I know what you reveal and what you conceal? Didn't I tell you there's a wisdom in it? That there's a purpose in it? May not be obvious to you, but there is. And this shows you that your question had several flaws. You thought you were superior, but actually, this man is superior in certain respects. And it fits into the answer. Of course, my fellow hypothetical atheists were wondering, but what is the answer? And behold, we said to the angels. Now, just so we know for sure that we understand that the angels are inferior in this respect, and that this potentially makes man superior. And we learn later, potentially much inferior, depending how he uses this gift. And behold, we said to the angels, bow down to Adam, show your inferiority. And they bowed down. Not so, Iblis. He refused and was proud. He was of those who reject faith. He was of the rejectors. So we see that the angels are indeed, in this respect, inferior. Also, we see the birth of something here. The birth of what? The birth of sin. Other religions, they might say that man made the first sin. Evil was always present. But here we see a different perspective. The Quran just sort of goes off on a tangent for a second. We see the birth of sin. In who? Iblis. And what is the motive that creates that sin? Pride. In the West, we often say that money is at the root of all evil. The Muslim would disagree. Based on this verse, at least, he might say that pride, arrogance, envy is at the root of all evil. Many people do terrible things without no material gain in sight. But here we see what is at the root of human evil: pride, arrogance, selfishness, irresponsibility, etc., etc. But back to the main point. Are you tired? I am, so I just asked. And we said, notice again, when Satan does come to Adam later and gets him to slip, we find in the Quran, by what door does he come to him? Again, it's pride. You could be like an angel. You could be immortal. Go ahead. It's the same illness, pride. But in any case, so we move on to verse 235. Let's at least agree upon this, my fellow atheists, hypothetically. We're intrigued. We are intrigued. The Quran has piqued our interest. See, we turn to verse 235, and we said, "O Adam, dwell you and your spouse in the garden, and eat freely thereof what you wish. But come not near this tree, for you will be among the wrongdoers." Kind of different than what we expect. No special emphasis is put on this tree. It just says, come not near this tree. Does this tree threaten God? No, we find out later in the Quran, no. If he touches it, will he compete with God in some way? No. He's just given a command, come not near this tree. But it's more than just a command. It's a moral command. It's made moral by saying, come not near this tree, for if you do, you will be among the wrongdoers. You will be committing wrong. So it's not just an arbitrary command. It's given an immediate, powerful, moral content. So we understand at this point that man is a learning creature, that he has the gift of communication. Somehow that relates to this whole issue before us. The third thing is that man is nurtured by God. He's brought along. He's taught. He's developed. He grows to a certain level. And now, with this command, we understand that man is now a moral being. The ingredients are all there. Let's see how he responds. But Satan caused them to slip. Notice, this is not, at least as we read it in the Quran, we expect this sin to be tremendous and great because we come from a European heritage. But it says Satan caused them to slip. To slip? To err? Sounds like it's not that big a deal. Satan caused them to slip. It's confusing for us. We don't expect that word to appear there. And Satan caused them to slip and expelled them from the state in which they were. And we said, get you all down, there will be enmity between you, and on earth will be your dwelling place and provision for a time. Okay, we know what's next. We grew up in this Western society. We know what to expect now, don't we? We've been haunted by it ever since we were little children. We've seen it in television, in books, on walls, in pictures. We know what to expect. At this moment, we know that on the cosmos and on creation, there will be unleashed a rage, an anger, a vehemence, a vengeance, a jealousy, a destructive power like has never been witnessed either before or since. A volcanic eruption of violent emotion and anger will explode, which will result in man and all his descendants being subjected to toil and torture on this earthly planet. And not only that, you know what's coming next? The women. The women will pay the biggest price. Why? Because it was the woman who tempted Adam with Satan. It was that evil temptress with that seductive voice who allied herself with Satan. The poor guy, he was no match. No match for the combination of this guile with this wit and charm. No match for the combined guile and intrigues of the devil and the woman. He had not a chance, and so he was duped. And so she will have to bear the biggest price. She will suffer the most earthly pain every month. And when she delivers her child, she'll suffer it like nobody else, no other suffering on earth. Why? Because she was primarily guilty. And the worst of it is that who will rule over her? The very being that his intelligence, that his wit was no match for her. Her intellectual unequal will rule over her. The utter humiliation. And so, we wince, we cringe, we close our eyes, because we know what to expect. We turn to the next verse, expecting that tremendous black thundercloud of violence to erupt on the scene. We turn to the next verse, knowing what to expect, and what does it say? Then Adam received certain words from his Lord. And they say the words here, commentators say, promises and words of consolation. What? Words? He's consoling Adam? Giving him promises? Where's the violence? Where's the volcanic eruption? This is like nothing we've come across before. Then Adam received certain words from his Lord, and his Lord turned towards him, for he is oft returning, most merciful. There's no violence here. Where's the jealousy? Where's the threatened God? It's not here. Then Adam, he turned towards him with mercy. And he relented towards Adam in kindness. Why? Later on we find that God forgave them. The woman was no more guilty than the man. God just went ahead and forgave them. After all, it was just a tree. But then wait a minute. If he forgave them, why doesn't he just pop them back into heaven? Okay, they sinned, you popped them down, okay, but now they were forgiven. It's not that big a deal. You turn to them in mercy, put them back in heaven.
Let's wait for the answer of this question. Try to...
I'm almost done. Put them back in heaven. But he doesn't put them back in heaven. Why? And then we realize, stop thinking like an American. Stop thinking like a European. Stop thinking like in the mindset of the religion you rejected years ago. Remember that there's no evidence in the Quran that God put man on this earth as a punishment. It serves another purpose. That's why he doesn't put him back into heaven. The purpose of life is not a punishment. But if it's not a punishment, what is it? Questions are swimming in our mind. We'll get to it. We said, 2 more verses. We said, go down, all of you, from here. Almost exactly the same words we heard before, but now we see them in a gentle tone. So we understand that this is not a punishment. But truly there will come to you guidance from me. Here are promises, consolation. And whoever follows my guidance, on them will be no fear. Neither shall they grieve. But we do need to know that this earthly life has severe consequences. Already the Quran will inform us this is not a joke, though. It's not a game. But those who are the rejectors, who give the lie to our signs, they shall be inhabitants of the fire, and therein they shall abide. Did the Quran answer any of our questions? Not quite yet. We're still early into it. And in the next 2 lectures, I'll take up some of these issues again. I'll take up where we left off. But let me just, and I'll pick it up from here next time, let me just summarize very briefly some key points. Very clearly, at least we understand this so far, man is created for some earthly purpose. And as a matter of fact, as we read through the Quran will insist on it. Did you think we created you purposely? Do you think we created the heavens and the earth and it's all between them without a purpose? It'll never let us forget it. It'll haunt us with that remark. Second, Adam sins and is forgiven. But he stays in this earthly life. Because it's not a punishment. It fulfills another purpose. 3 features of the human character are emphasized in this account. And this is where I'm going to take it up next time tomorrow. I'm going to elaborate on these some more. 1, man's intelligence. He's a creature of intellect. He's a learning creature, and a creature who can communicate on a fairly high level. And so that his learning takes on a cumulative aspect. Man is a moral creature. What signals his earthly beginnings? He makes his first moral choice. 3rd, as the angel said, and God agreed, man's going to suffer on this earthly life. Suffering somehow fits into the equation. Man's intelligence, an environment of adversity, humans will suffer. They are creatures of choice. At this stage, and I'll talk more about this tomorrow, at this stage we just see pieces coming together. When we first picked up this Quran, they were like disparate pieces scattered all over the place. But now we're like one of those young children, like my children. They love to build puzzles with 1,000 pieces before us. And we're starting to somehow see that certain ones seem key, and certain ones seem to fit together, and we're starting to regroup them. We could see them slowly coming together into something. So already we're faced with a choice. Only 39 verses into the Quran. I'm going to invite you to something. My fellow hypothetical atheists. We have 2 choices in front of us. We could either put down the Quran now and forget the encounter we just had, or we could go on. Personally, I'm of the type of temperament that has to go on. The Quran has faced me with my own questions and shattered my presuppositions. I thought for sure that I knew the answers to the questions. I was sure how the Quran would answer those questions. I had anticipated. And it has shocked me because it has shattered those presuppositions. So where am I now? My presuppositions are shattered. I've been challenged with my own questions. I have many fewer answers than when I started, and I have many more questions than when I started. But if I leave here, and if any of you leave now, my fellow hypothetical atheists, then you're just leaving without ever really knowing. I say we got to do this. And it is a scary endeavor. I say we have to finish this to the end. Either this will finally culminate in something that we recognize as truth and as coherent, or it'll shatter into 1,000 pieces and we could return to our atheism fully convinced that we were right in the first place. But one way or another, we got to see it to the end. I don't know. I don't like to leave the doors open. I got to know either way. And I think many of you do too. So I'll see you at the next lecture. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May God's peace and mercy be upon you.
Takbir. 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 Thank you, Brother Jeffrey, for this enlightening experience. I'm sure by this time we have a lot of comments to make, a lot of questions that we have. But I think let's forget that we are hypothetical atheists at this point. Let's come back to being Muslims. I would like to take some comments maybe from the guests first, the guest speakers, and then we'll move to the rest. I have an announcement here. The children ages 6 to 9 and the teenagers are crying. Please end on time. So that's to me. So we'll end, inshallah, on time. So, Dr. Jamal, start with you. If you have any comments, do you mind if you come over here and make them?
I think it is more appropriate perhaps to make a comment after he finishes his story.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I would have concurred with Dr. Jamal, unfortunately, and I'm very sad to say this because I'll be leaving earlier for another commitment. So I won't be listening to the rest of the story. You might be answering the questions that or the comment that I'll make it for you.
Now, just a couple of things. We do get encounters. I have lived in this country for 17 years so far. I have discussed with university professors and so on, with church people. I go to public schools, universities, colleges, and so on. And we are faced with the same. There are a couple of things that I just wanted to ask, actually the best way to put them, is that there is a lot in the Quran that should be complemented by what the Prophet ﷺ has explained, because many of the things have been left out. So I don't know whether you are taking that into consideration or not, because I don't want to people to go and think all the answers in the Quran. The Prophet himself said there are certain things in the Quran that were complemented by the Prophet. So this is Allah. This is the first one. Now the second thing, I did mention something here, I don't know whether you were there or not, that even the experiences, when you are talking about the children, I know many of these statistics people give in conferences and so on, to me personally they are very exaggerated. But there is also some other thing that I want you to address when you continue, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually in the Quran not only taught us, actually in very details, about questions that are being to be asked, the way he handles them. Say for instance when he was addressing Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was challenged by, they put him to fire. Like these atheists, sometimes you tell them, even people have asked irrational questions, they have tried to do irrational things for very rational things. Allah tells us Ibrahim was put to the fire after he demolished the idols and so on. Now these people, because they are short-sighted, somebody who's to whom God has reversed the characteristics of the fire, and he walked out of the fire, they thought the king will punish him. But the king was more wiser than them. So he asked him the dialogue that was mentioned in the Quran, who is your, he said, why do you claim this? He said, because I have my Lord, you are not my Lord. Then he said to him, what does this Lord do? قَالَ رَبِّيَ الَّذِي يُحْيِي وَيُمِيتُ. The man brought two people, killed one, and preserved the other, to tell him that I can do this. So Ibrahim didn't argue with him, because sometimes actually these atheists or so-called other people, they bring very logical questions, and I think if we try to answer every question, we'll go wrong. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually teaches in the Quran that when somebody makes a point, logical, very good, you should stop there and look for something else rather than pursuing it just endlessly and you don't get anywhere. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, he challenged him by the other one, قال فإن الله يأتي بالشمس. You claim to be God, you can kill and give a life, I'm not going to argue about it, but Allah makes the sun rise from the east, set on the west, reverse it. Because that's something that you can challenge people, and the king didn't do anything, and this is why he couldn't punish him. But still the question lingered in Ibrahim's mind. This is why Allah tells us, he went on and he said, قَالَ رَبِّ أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. Because he has been challenged, now he has to seek the answer from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Allah went on to tell him, قَالَ فَخُذْ أَرْبَعَةً مِنَ الطَّيْرِ. Like take the 4 bears, actually he said فَصُرْهُنْ, which means you squeeze them, mince them, then put pieces into it, I will show you how I manifest myself to you. So this dialogue is also there in the Quran that I wanted. The last point I wanted to make about this exaggeration about the children, inshallah, is the question that relates also to what Allah tells me and tells you, that we can do this much but not that much, even if we desire so. Yani, with children, for instance, I mentioned this story about Nuh alayhi salam, about Yusuf and his brothers, about all of this, because parents sometimes feel very sad and they actually get into despair when their children, like the story of Muhammad you have mentioned, and they think we did something wrong. And people think sometimes ill of people who are very pious, very good. And I have a lot of examples like this. You get people who are, we cannot question their faith, we cannot question their piety, we cannot question their efforts that are making, and their children get exactly the opposite. So this consolence and comfort that we get in the Quran from prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who did. So these are the things that I wanted to say, and thank you very much. I enjoyed what you are saying actually.
Okay, I can't
comment about the story of Abraham.
I can't remember all the points, but let me just begin with the first one. I'm trying to present you as best I can with an authentic experience of Islam. When the potential Muslim starts to begin to study Islam, his primary source, really his only source, he begins with the Quran. He's not familiar with very much more than that. So I'm trying to present it as authentically as I can. Of course, I can start to bring in all sorts of information and other sources and commentaries to a much greater degree, but it would lose its authenticity. I'm trying to be I want to show the audience that the Quran can guide a person, a very skeptical person, towards belief in God. That's the point I'm trying to make. And I hope to carry that out to the second and third lecture to explain exactly how that can be done. Sometimes, and honestly, if you start bringing in elaborations from hadith or other Quranic commentaries or things like that, you could actually do more damage than good to a person who's trying to consider Islam for the first time. Because the hadith collections are extremely large. They deal with many different types of situations, different types of temperaments and personalities. You might tell a person, you're likely to confuse the person who's newly considering Islam by just, bringing in lots of other information. I would try to focus on central points and actually really focus his attention on the Quran to begin with. Because most converts come to Islam through the Quran, not through anything else. You bring in too much information. I remember people started telling me, well, there's this hadith and that. And I said, what? What's a hadith? And is that different from the Quran? Is that a revelation? And I said, is it of the same level of authenticity as the Quran? And they said, well, it depends. There's this type and that. I got very confused. Finally, I decided to put the Muslims aside for a minute and just study the Quran. I wanted them to know what the principal source is. Now, as I go in my lectures, I will be mentioning a few sayings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, here and there that help to elaborate on some of the points. But I'm trying to present this experience, this journey, as authentically as it occurs. All right? That's the first point. The second thing about types of questions that you should ask or you shouldn't ask, or certain questions you shouldn't deal with, or if you can't deal with them, it's probably best to say, I don't know. I can't deal with it. All right? And then maybe bring up other considerations. But there are many questions that really can be dealt with. There are many statements that Muslims make that demand an explanation. I remember many times when I was discussing questions with Muslims, and I was the person, by the way, who would say, I was very good at it. Oh, and I was being very mean about it, I agree. I'd say, oh, so you think God is unjust because he's punishing all of mankind for the sin of one man. So you feel God is unjust. If you say that, this is what I used to say to them. If you say that, I'll at least say you're consistent. There's no contradiction there. But if you claim that that's not true, we have a problem. But if you agree to that, then I'll at least agree we have no contradiction. I might not feel very compelled to worship such a God, but I'll at least agree there's no contradiction. This is the type of game I used to play. Now, people would say to me, well, you can't ask such questions. I said, well, look, I didn't make the statement. You came to me with two statements that are apparently in contradiction. I'm not asking to know all the secrets of the heavens and the earth. But if you bring with me two statements, then you better either have an explanation for them or be able to resolve them, or just don't bring them to me in the first place. The burden is on you. What you take to me, you're at a burden to explain. Otherwise, don't take it. Now, this is how I used to handle the argument. Now, the Quran, I think, does deal with these issues very well. And this is why I talk about our children. Because I think we are not doing our homework. If it's one thing, if we struggle and we try to learn and we try to understand our children and we try to relate this religion to them, and for one reason or another they just don't buy it. But to ease our conscience, we have to make 110% effort to do the very best we can. When Noah's son is up on the hill, he's still trying to get him back. Come on, please, etc. The prophets never give up on their children. They are desperately trying, or one of their family members, they desperately try to get them back. I don't see that in our community in America. I was eating dinner at a Muslim family, let me finish this point, at a Muslim family's house the other day. The children were watching Nickelodeon. There was a program about the plurality of religions in America, and how we have to learn to respect all religions as essentially equal. And I was sitting with the parents, and we were sitting together, and we were talking about the politics back in Pakistan. Well, while we're arguing and discussing what's going on in Pakistan, our children are living here in the United States and are confronting what that television screen is taking to them. I'm not saying what it's taking to them is evil, but what things that are vital to us are often have no relevance to their daily reality whatsoever, or very little. I think oftentimes we're just ignoring them. We are not seriously communicating with them. We're not making the effort to understand what they are thinking, what problems they have. And I'm not condemning you, by the way, for this. I'm just mentioning as a community. And we are not putting in the homework, the time, and the effort to deal with the problems that they will face. We're too much absorbed in our own hurt, our own culture shock, our own struggle to be a Muslim convert, for example. And we are, too absorbed in ourselves to take sufficient interest in our children. So, those are the three things I have.
Thank you.
And I'm not condemning what you said.
Make a comment and then we'll...
This might be a shock to you, but I come from your same background. I'm an English literature major. I've read all those novels that deal with nihilism and that this life is nothing and that there's
Lots
no
of them
way
are.
out.
Yeah.
This is a trend, and it's a deliberate trend, you see. It has been done deliberately by those who do not know that there is a religion on this earth that can solve all those problems. Now, the threat that we have against our kids in this society has to do primarily with epistemology and knowledge. Where do they get their information? And I think it's the problem of the Muslims, that they have got to screen information and pay enough attention to have comments on information that is drilled into their kids' heads, that there is something called new Islamization of knowledge, that all these ma'arif, or the knowledge that we get in schools, is going to be turned around and seen from the Muslim perspective, and people are exerting a lot of effort to present this to the United States here, so that the kids that are growing up will have a new Islam that is given to them in the books. And I think, just to make us feel better, it is not all that bleak, but we are trying our best as Muslims to give the solution to the coming generation, bi'idhnillah.
Yeah, that's a nice point. My first experience as a Muslim was in San Francisco, and we had some 20,000 Muslims in the Bay Area. I frankly never saw a Muslim kid over 16 committed to the religion. I don't know why. I was talking to a brother on the way up here from Kansas City. There are several thousand Muslims living in Kansas City. I asked him how many Muslim children were involved in the community. He felt that there was about 20. They were between the ages of 15 and 20. That's a pretty bleak statistic. Even if that number was 50% or 30% or 20%, that's bad. I have met many, many Muslim children on campus. I shouldn't even call them Muslim because they prefer not to be called such. Children born of Muslim parents with Arab names in my classes. They'll come to my office. We'll get into discussions. I'll ask them, by the way, are you Muslim? They'll say, well, my parents are. I know that response very well. Because when I was an atheist and people used to ask me, are you Christian? I used to say, well, my parents are. I think it is serious. I think, when we discuss these issues, we are thinking of this little group we have here. And maybe this little group is quite successful with their children. But there are several thousand families out there. I think for whatever numbers of people that are here, there are tons of people out there that have either given up and feel that the problems that they're facing are overwhelming, or maybe they're just so busy in their life they just haven't had the time to really consider it. I'm not blaming anybody, and I agree with you, we do have to start thinking. I don't see the questions that Westerners ask about religion as dangerous. I don't see them as even wrong. I almost think they're natural. Because when you read that first verse of the Quran, even the angels ask the same question. God in the Quran puts it in the mouth of the angels. And he doesn't condemn them for it. He just points out that they're wrong. So that's what I think we have to start doing, formulating a response to those questions. The victory, if Islam is going to have a victory in the West, it's going to be because it's going to present a coherent and compelling picture of its own religion. And I think that if we're not going to do it, we have to hope a later generation does. But I think there's no generation like the present that is in a better position to take up that battle. I think it becomes harder with each successive generation.
For the parents of the kids, I see some kind of exaggeration made in terms of, showing our kids, and it seems as if the majority are, away from Islam. That's the way he presented it. I kind of disagree a little bit on that. Can any of the audience share this opinion with me?
Disagree with it?
Yeah.
The issue is very, very simple, but now it looks confused. Why? Because the way it was presented in philosophical way. It makes us confused. So the problem here, and I feel also Brother Jeffrey when he made it confused, because he started with Surah Al-Baqarah, and to respond to some question that deals with the faith. If we go back to Islam, 96 surah was revealed in Mecca that deals with the faith to come to one conclusion. If we reach this conclusion, the rest easy to answer. So what is this conclusion that this 96 surah dealt with? Is لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nobody can question him what he is doing, and he's going to question us. 96 surah is dealing with this conclusion. And last week I was traveling, and a woman asked me this kind of question. I told her there is two areas in Islam. One area we should ask and use the intellect is the area of the faith. Once we agreed that there is one God, these are his attributes, he can do that and do that. If we can agree on this, that's it. We have to take everything else. Otherwise, akhi, you cannot answer me why we pray 4 rak'ah in dhuhr and 2 in fajr. You cannot come up with any answer. The only answer is the first one. لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون. So it's very, very simple. So the problem, why we are losing our children, or why discomfort, they reject the faith, because they came to Islam through a philosophical way, or they be introduced.
What's the point?
That's what I'm coming to the conclusion. So it's not a judgment or a measurement for us, those people that they've been converted and reject the faith because they came through a philosophical way. And the children also, when we presented the faith, we don't present it as the Prophet ﷺ presented to the early companions, dealing with God. Who's God? Before we dealing with the commandments. So it's very, very simple. The issue is very, very simple. We should not make it that complicated, that I know maybe some brothers, they start, I have to leave America now, tomorrow, before I finish anything. So it's very, very simple.
The only thing I'm trying to say is that the children are living an American experience, and they are American. If not them, then certainly their descendants. And they will confront these questions. It is, any American will tell you, you as an American face them. It is a phenomenon in America that the majority of Americans, regardless of their religious roots, have no strong commitment to any religion. And Americans know what is the heart of the problem. It's because religions don't make sense. Now, that's why I said that if Islam does make sense, and we ignore it and tell people that they shouldn't be concerned with such issues, I don't think it's the problem with Islam. I think it's the problem with us. I think that if we ignore this responsibility, we are only hurting ourselves and the future of our community in America. I think Islam can do well to hold its own. I actually think, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think that Islam could lead the American society out of this endless maze of questions. I am utterly convinced it can. And I think the explanation is extremely simple, and it's contained in the Quran. So this is why I'm campaigning for this question. like you said, if you tell, I think the Quran was revealed for all times and places. I don't think the mentality of 20th century man is exactly the same as it was for the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him. I believe that the Quran was arranged in a certain order for a particular reason. I believe that when you read through the Quran from the beginning to the end, it takes you on a journey. And that arrangement is perfectly suited to that journey. So I have a somewhat different feeling about it, to just say. And I do think there is a real threat here. I don't think, what you were telling me about first the belief and put aside these philosophical questions. Well, even on the level of taking this message to anyone else, to my mind, and I'm not trying to be mean, but to my mind, I hear that from every religion. The Christians say, don't ask, just try it. Or you have to believe, or there are certain things, all right, okay, but let me say it anyway, even though you didn't mean it.
He didn't mean that. So I just have to make it clear. Okay. I know you didn't mean that, and he doesn't mean that you mean that.
But I don't believe, I'm not saying that you meant that. What I am saying, though, is that when I first, this is not you, but I think that some people may have understood it that way. When I first approached Islam, Muslims told me, you can't ask these things. And then I used to say, well, fine, then if you don't have an answer or it's not right to ask these questions, then I'll go ahead and stay an atheist. Everybody tells me I can't ask. So when we have the answer there, I think it's our duty to formulate that answer, to understand the question, and to do something about it, to present it in a relevant way. And I'm sorry that I made it seem, well, forget it.
Well, would like to thank you, Dr. Jeffrey, and all the brothers and sisters who attended. I'm sure we all were entertained, and we all had lots of questions in our minds, and we want to make some comments. And that's why we have part 2 and part 3, inshallah. Before we conclude, I would like to remind you with a very important note. Tomorrow morning, the session that is going to be the starting session at 9 o'clock is a very important lecture, and in my opinion is a historical lecture. We see a lot of debate concerning Muslim women. Should we separate them? What should we do in parties and in Eid and in all our activities? How we should deal with them? Does what we have now was at the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, or is it made recently? Were some of the things that were at Prophet Muhammad ﷺ disappeared now or not? That's what Dr. Jamal is going to do, make a comparison between the state of women at the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the present time. What went wrong? What went right? Why there is a change, if there is any, and so on. And this is going to be at 9 o'clock, inshallah, followed by the second part of Dr. Jeffrey Lang. So hopefully we'll see all of you at 9 o'clock. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم.
So I talk tomorrow at 2:30 to 4 too.
Assalamu alaikum.